All right, many thanks for those two stimulating presentations. I thought they both gave us sort of measured and also self-critical accounts of the different methodological traditions that give us a good starting point for thinking about their relative roles. I think they're both convincing that learning occurs by both routes. And some of the questions that I'm already asking is, are they actually trying to do the same thing or something slightly different? Where are the overlaps? And I was interested to see that there was quite a lot of common ground, particularly in the new opportunities. Both traditions may be converging on some of the opportunities offered by new technology, social media, and so on, which I think is potentially quite exciting. Clearly, that's already stimulating lots of questions. I've just been given one pile. So we're going to turn to the panel discussion first, but before we do that, each of the panelists who've not yet spoken are going to just give us 1 minute on their perspective and what they will bring to the panel. So can I start with you, Clara?
Thank you very much. I come with 20 years of district-level management experience, and I think what I'm bringing here is I'm a frontline health worker, manager, what do you call us? The research user, research implementer. Everything happens at the district, and sometimes I think I've felt like a punching bag. I have the policymaker, the researcher, us wanting to ask questions, find answers to their questions. We have the community on the ground that I'm interacting with in our local communities, in conflict with the systems and the services I'm providing, and also with their own questions and challenges. And so I think the district level is the most important part, I think, of most of our health systems. And therefore, I think we need to be in the know, knowledgeable, informed, to be able to participate and be involved in what the top and the bottom is trying to achieve. So in this debate, I think research for us at the district level, all types of research have a role, be it experimental, epidemiological, action to research, and indeed participatory action research too. So I think what I would like to bring to this panel is that I'd like to be involved in research that will answer to the challenges I face day by day, and challenges that are often not heard because the questions that are asked are not always involving us. So therefore, the research that will matter to me is the research that will bring about change, and hopefully positive change, that will impact on the communities that I work with, and that change that will be sustained in the health systems and people-centered health systems that we are talking about. That includes even me as a manager, a health worker. I'm part of that people-centered health system. It's not only the community or the patient that we're talking about. So I think that's perspective I hope to share.
Thank you, Clara. Manan, would you like to tell us a bit?
Good morning, everyone, and thanks, Barbara. It's a pleasure to be here. In terms of my role, I work at UNICEF on the interface, I suppose, of evidence and knowledge to policy and implementation. I suppose my role in this panel, in a sense, is what one of my friends would describe me, and often does scathingly, as one of the global guys. But personally and institutionally, I think Lucy set it up really well in the first plenary when she said that health systems are fundamentally about politics and about social justice. But then if that's the case, our research methods, our paradigms, the questions we ask need to fundamentally engage with politics, not just in scope, but also in their methodology about, at all stages of the process, as to how they can drive change. I'm also particularly interested in, dare I say, the political economy of health systems research itself. Many of the themes we've heard already in terms of how do we change the drivers, the incentives, the structures, the distribution of power in health systems research itself, and what's our role in doing so that research can be participated by and can be benefited by people who are at the front line, people like Clara. We're particularly interested in the district. So research that's practical and useful. And that's not necessarily what's always produced. And we're particularly interested as UNICEF in the district level because we think that's fundamental to how changes in health systems occur.
Thank you. And Bruno.
Thanks, Barbara. I'll start with a disclaimer, actually. I'm going to play the role of a health policy and systems researcher here on this panel, because we all know that Napoleon said, health policy and systems research is far too important to leave it to decision makers and policy makers and funders, leave alone the randomistas. But that won't mean that I'll let off the hook the community, our research community, because I think from these two presentations, you may get the impression that we are struggling with different kinds of methods and perhaps with different kinds of paradigms, which definitely is the case. Now, I would want to challenge our health policy and systems community to move beyond this problem, actually beyond the method-driven approaches, to focus on the problems we're facing. Because if we don't realize that most of our problems are wicked and intractable and messy, because they're complex in nature, then I think these methodological debates are not going to help us much. So it's kind of a plea to reflect on the solutions we need to have and to find, and therefore the research we need to produce to help us solve our messy problems in this world. And I think if we see in these kind of conferences much more attention than in the past for complexity, but basically mathematical complexity. Now, given that our health systems are really about people and that they are people, I think we should focus much more on the social complexity of the nature of our health systems. And I think the challenge to the panel, in a sense, and to René and James, but as well to all of you here, is in how far do our current methodological developments help us to make sense of the complexity of our world and to link up with people like René, who really are doing this nitty-gritty groundwork of trying to find local solutions.
All right, thank you very much. I have some questions from the floor already, and I'm going to start with one that I think all the panelists can have something to say about. The questioner has put this in the context of feminist evaluation in particular, but I think it can be thought of more broadly from any angle of power that feminist evaluation might be one example of. And the question I'll read out and then perhaps suggest how you might think about it as well. Whose knowledge matters in people-centered health systems is the first one. How can research contribute, and who engages in this research? And I guess underpinning that is really, whose knowledge should matter, how should research contribute, and who should engage in this research may be the important question. Slightly rephrase that. So maybe I'll start with you, Bruno, if you don't mind, and then I'll go along the row, and James, I'll come to you last.
I would say probably, again, from a research perspective or from a complexity perspective, local knowledge matters much. And that means that we really have to engage in this interaction with, like, what's, again, referring to participatory action research. It's really trying to figure out how problems on the ground are being solved by looking at how they're being perceived, what kind of relations are playing out, what kind of structures are there, social, economic, political structures. But then the challenge, of course, is there is another kind of knowledge that matters as well. That is similar knowledge that could be applicable in your particular context, but that comes from another context. Or vice versa. The challenge then becomes, how can we learn from local context? And what can we derive from particular solutions that work in one context? So how can we decontextualize it and move to another setting? Yeah.
Okay. To continue to reflect on that.
Whose knowledge matters sort of raises the question of what you're trying to achieve, right? And I think we all believe in participation and, the methods that René has said, but the challenge is that people don't want to just participate for the sake of it, right? People participate because they have an issue or something that they want to change. So the knowledge that matters is what can facilitate that change or achieve that change in the first place. And I think if we start with that, then that's what should determine our methods. I think often we have more discussions on which statistical test or which method of inductive qualitative analysis we're going to do than how will this research actually change, address the priorities of the people that are participating.
Okay.
Clara, do you have...
Yeah, I'm just wondering, asking about whose knowledge first. For me, we need to find out also what knowledge are we talking about. For me, on the ground, the knowledge is produced from the actions a lot of the time, the communities we've been working with. And sometimes it's not knowledge that you expected. It's come because of the actions and the involvement of the people that it touches. So whose knowledge, like I think Kumanana says, it depends on the environment and the circumstances, I think, that we are looking at.
And Renee, sort of comment on that.
I mean, all of us matter. I wouldn't want to say, what I think is problematic is when one group's knowledge subjugates another group, especially when the group that's being subjugated is vastly more numerous and more affected and more than the group that is. So I think we've had a problem in certain kinds of knowledge becoming over-dominant and dominating and becoming a source of power. And where you see this is you just see the fact that we have huge knowledge about many areas, but we don't implement it. So we've known about water-related diseases for several thousand years, but we still don't have safe water supplies. So I think it's a question of not just whose knowledge matters, but how does knowledge bring power, and then whose power matters. And where knowledge is used as a way of, sort of overcoming, of taking people out of the power to bring the resources that they need for health, and that can be at local level. But it can equally be when a government in Africa loses the power to be able to control its own system because so much of its system is externally funded with power residing outside. So I wouldn't like to only say that this is only relevant at a local level. I think it has relevant, particularly given globalization at higher levels.
Okay, and James, do you want to comment on this question?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So I agree with everything the panelists said, and I think it's a bit of a catch-22 at times, because if we want to drive the research questions based on what some of the most vulnerable communities are experiencing, it's very hard often to hear their voice, because in fact they're quite vulnerable and often don't have that power. So I think that really is a challenge, both internally and externally. How do we create those fora to hear those voices? How do we connect those networks to do the knowledge transfer where it's relevant, but then also generate that knowledge from all of those involved? And I think it's a huge challenge. I don't think that there's a simple solution to that question, unfortunately, and I think we've all pointed that out in the panel.
Thank you. The next question I think I'm going to put particularly to Kumanan and Clara, because I think as users of research, they may have some particular things to say about how we make data work for people and what their experience is of receiving data as research users, and the difficulties perhaps of making it work for people. What kinds of data are the easier to carry across?
Okay. What kind of data is data that is useful for me? Is the data that can translate into a change in the way we work. I'm talking about the district level. It's data that will impact on the community. We have at the district level, for example, the health management information systems, and I think this was brought out. And it's producing data, but a lot of the time, that data is not analyzed. The health workers are not able to to utilize that to make a change in the health service delivery. Because maybe it's not the data they find is important to what they do. So I think the beginning of data should be what is important to the day-to-day work that I am doing, to the service that I'm trying to deliver. And if that data can answer that question, it's easier for the user to utilize it and then make a change, make decisions based on that data that is being given to me. But often enough, the data we are receiving may not have been generated through our own understanding. And therefore, it doesn't produce the results that we expect it to. So again, it comes back to this issue of who is generating, again, the data? And who participated in coming up with the data that should be generated? Is it me who needs the answers? Or is it somebody else up there who needs the answers? So for me, that's usually the punching bag issue. Should I have been consulted first? Yeah, or should I be consulted when things have gone wrong and the answers are not there? Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Come on.
I could just add to what Clara said. I think sometimes it seems that in health systems we almost fetishize data. Like we have this mantra that what gets counted gets done, but that's not always true. We always complain often, especially at sort of global and national levels, about the quality of local data or the paucity of local data. But as my colleague Don Matheson has been doing some work for us, I mean, he would say, when you go at the local level, it's often staggering how much data there is. And where is that data going? Is it actually being used at local level, or is it just going up to the national and global levels? We all say how important routine health information systems are, and yet, are we doing enough to support those? I think we all have a role at all levels to do that. But we need to make the data usable. I mean, if we have complex tools with complex Excel spreadsheets, and also it comes back to this culture of health systems research, right? Is our system that prioritizes high-impact, peer-reviewed journals, papers, tenure tracks, is that a system that produces data that's usable for people like Clara, for communities at the local level? Often it isn't. So I think it's really how do we make data more usable? And how can we be as parsimonious as possible where we understand the cost of collecting that data, of writing that data up, of trying to funnel it to the center? And I think the use of new technologies isn't a magic bullet, but it's something that can assist with that and making data much more useful.
So I think the next question, which picks up on some of that, and in particular Clara's point about who is the information for, who are the data for. And I'm going to ask the researchers this one, though. I mean, should researchers more confidently assert their role in holding authorities to account? Are the data for holding authorities to account? Should they be used that way? Could they be used better that way? And maybe I'll start with you, Renee, on that, and then James, and then Bruno.
I mean, the researchers are part of a community, and the researcher is often a facilitator of other processes, or at least in the way I'm thinking in this respect. So is it the researcher who holds to account, or is it the society that's affected by it that holds to account? And I think that's where sometimes, if I could come back to the earlier thing, the way we collect data is sometimes quite disempowering of societies, because we collect data in our health system on diseases and commodities, but people come into the system as people with multiple health issues, and through processes. And we don't collect data very well on processes, on relations, and things like that. So I think one has to really look at the holding of the system to account on the people's terms does sometimes mean that the people have to generate a whole other set of evidence, which may not be the kind of data we are used to collecting in the system, to engage with it. So I believe researchers are facilitators of society holding the system to account.
Okay. And James, do you have a comment on that?
So agree with Renee that often, sorry, we've got some feedback. often the role of the researcher really is this facilitating role, whether it's bringing different types of techniques together, whether it's bringing sometimes funding streams into a certain question and trying to really facilitate some additional work around those areas. But there is certainly a whole tradition of researchers who are also advocates. And I think that that's an important other role that many researchers have been able to take, and I think it's an important thing for us to consider. Where are those places? What are the fora in which we as researchers can also act as advocates? And what are the benefits of doing that? Like, must you be an insider? Must it be within your own system? Could it be within a different system? And also, what are some of the risks of doing that? At what point does your advocacy role somehow influence the perception of the supposedly objective research that you're doing? So I think, again, it's a thorny issue, but I do believe we could do more.
I think I can be quite short about it. I think if researchers are citizens, then we have the social responsibility to speak up to power. But it often clashes with vested interests, and I think not in the least our own career perspective. So I think that leads to quite some possibilities for debate and to push things.
Okay. Sure.
Point on that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that when a researcher is an activist, and many researchers are, because inquiry is the fuel of democratization in some respects, it's seen to question the neutrality of your science. And I think that's a very flawed perspective that sometimes puts researchers on the defensive to act in the citizenship role as part of society. And I think we need to recognize that knowledge has a value space, whether it's being brought from an international agency or it comes with values and politics. And so the notion that when you do act in a more positioning and activist context, somehow your science is worse, I think we have to contest that.
I think that leads nicely into the next question also. I mean, I was actually going to go to a user next, but I'll stay with the research first because I can feel this debate heating up a bit, and that seems like a good thing to me. The question on the card is, from a participatory action research perspective, can you address the issue of comparability, generalizability of findings? And I'd like to open that up to a slightly more general question about when we assert that participatory research is science. What do we mean by that? Why do we want it to be science? What's going on in that statement? So I think that's particularly leveled at you, Renee. So I'm going to come to you first, and then also ask Bruno and James to comment on that. I mean, please, shout if I'm not asking the right people the right questions. But you go first on that, and then I have another question for the users.
I mean, I think if you take quantum physics to its infinite degree, you probably get very close to religion. So I'm a bit confused about science. So I'm not sure I think there are definitely various ways in which knowledge is produced. And it's both science and art. And when you get into knowledge which is produced in more constructivist or reflexive ways, it is an art as much as it is the methodology, the systematizing of methodology. Yeah, I think the question of generalizability is really, has been an issue, but I think we're living in exciting times because what we're talking about is generalizing insight from setting to setting. And if we're looking at the kind of top-down globalization that we've been building, where we've been told that these things, there is no alternative, you do it this way or no way. And we're now looking at more bottom-up processes that are being engendered through information technology, sharing experience from local to local and region to region. I think we're at a stage where there is an alternative. And this alternative of how we generalize across these various contexts and settings, the insights we are learning about our systems, about our society, the knowledge we are building, we're at the thin end of the wedge of it. And I think it's an exciting place to be.
Thanks. Bruno, do you want to come
Well, it was a question which floated in my mind anyway when I heard your presentation. And I think I would frame it slightly different. The huge opportunity you have in participatory action research is that you can learn from action, that you learn in very local conditions, and that usually you deal with quite difficult problems. So that potential should be unlocked. And then I would, okay, I promised myself I wouldn't talk about realist evaluation or theory-driven. But the point in the sense is, there's nothing more practical than a good theory. And so the challenge in a way for participatory action research, as it was for action research in the past, is to close this loop between local knowledge and knowledge that you can decontextualize and apply in other contexts. So it's not just transferring insights from one setting to the next, but rather indicating it worked here because of that thing in this particular context for those people. And if you reach that level of understanding and we can transfer it to other settings, then people in other settings may be able to apply it well. Yes, this setting is slightly different, but I think we can make it work because we can do this in that way. And I think that's a way to bridge local knowledge and push it to the next level.
I mean, I was referring to insights on what works, so I think we're saying the same thing.
We're doing this. Sure.
Okay, I want to move now to, or you want to come in on that? Yeah.
Can I just make a comment on generalizability? I mean, we talk about that a lot. And so obviously there's a need to share ideas and have some understanding about what works and how it might work for other settings. But we, at the same time, talk about complexity and context and how important that is. And even when you have, fashionable ideas like whether it's community health workers in their role post-Almirata, whether it's cash transfers, or whether I think it's results-based financing, for example, to actually see whether they work in specific systems or at the district level, you need to do very specific research. I worked for long enough on randomized controlled trials for clinical intervention to see even there the challenges, or that claim to be a gold standard description of reality is very flawed. So I think when we make this call for generalizability, we should think, well, why are we doing that? And at what level is it useful? But where does it actually create some quite negative unintended consequences?
So in other words, is generalizability the wrong question? Let's come back to that. One question here, which I'm sure is an important problem for all of us, whether we're on the researcher, user, or commissioner side, is that we have information overwhelm, as the question puts it. And I think from a user and perhaps even commissioner perspective, because there's also a question here about how UNICEF commissions research that I'll tack onto this one. How are you going to prioritize what you want to know, how you're going to sift through everything that's known about it, and what you're going to commission for that matter. And the specific issue that is on the card about UNICEF's commissioning is how does UNICEF choose between commissioning from local, for example, African researchers compared to Ivy League institutions or the Oxbridge system or wherever else the more privileged sources of knowledge may be. So I'm going to start with you on that, Kaman. I'm a bit putting you on the spot, balancing both sets of issues there.
I think that's a very important question, and I'm glad it's been asked. I said I'm interested in the political economy of health systems research and the distribution of power, and I think it's not about the people and institutions, but I think we all would acknowledge that it's not ideal. And I think it's really important when we think about these big level political issues of social justice that we start with ourselves as a health system research community. And things are not quite right? I think that we need to do much more. We are certainly trying, and we are trying to say that the research we commission, in the first place, we should be using local and national institutions. Now, there are some sort of nuances to that, because I sometimes joke that we work in Indonesia, and I sometimes think that to the global system, it seems like there are 3 people in Indonesia to do research. There are 240 million people in Indonesia. So that's a real problem. That said, obviously, the very established institutions, they have a presence. I mean, they put on great receptions, and they have great capacity and great ability to sort of transfer knowledge, to build capacity. So the partnership model works. But I still think we need to do a lot more where we put the local institutions and the national institutions first, and their needs first, and prioritize commissioning research from those institutions. And we are certainly moving in that direction. I wouldn't pretend that we've got it right, but we are very aware of the issue, and I think we are making some progress as an institution.
Okay. Clara, how do you sift the information and figure out what's important and what's not from all the things that come into your inbox?
Yeah, I think I'd like to concur with Kumanan about prioritizing. I think we need to start prioritizing those of us that have been behind. Africa, developing world. In terms of research capacity, you want us to be able to participate in research, but I think a lot of the capacity is missing at the district. I speak a lot with the district level, and I think more resources need to be put into that area. Yeah. Participatory methodologies that we've used, participatory action research that we've used, has been able to work with our communities and local level in terms of working with them and getting questions and creating knowledge at that level. But then as you move up, we are saying this knowledge needs to move up and create more questions and more answers at the higher level. But the capacity to do that, for those of us that need to move that kind of process, is not there. And I think that needs to be looked into. So when they're commissioning, I think capacity needs to go and recognize that you may not commission a lot of work at our level or in Africa or whatever. It's because the capacity is not there for you to see these whatever requests and whatever. So that process also needs to come down, build the capacity so that we can generate the questions that in the form that you'd like them to be at the higher level. We have loads of questions, but they don't get to you because we don't know how to get them to you most of the time.
Can I just add a clarification on the capacity issue? I think we also need to go and look for the capacity. We shouldn't just assume it's not there. With the Alliance for Health Systems and Policy Research, we put out a call for implementation research on maternal and child health and in low and middle income countries. We got 222 applications. We only had 10 grants to give, and they were small grants. So there's enormous capacity out there that's not being tapped. And this was for implementer-led research projects, and we're doing that. So yes, there's capacity issues, and whatever we do, we should look at how we're building capacity. But again, let's not ignore that there is enormous capacity out there. This conference, this community has built a lot of capacity over the last few years. And so we need to make sure we're not just going to the usual suspects.
But I think it's to say, yeah, who are you dealing with? I'm trying to deal with the frontliners. They need to be built up, I think, because the knowledge is coming from the frontliners, and they need to also be part of that process to understand that what they are doing can create knowledge that is useful to many other people. And yes, there'll be the capacity, talking maybe the researchers that are already in the picture, but we need to bring in the ones that are not seen. And so I don't know, we need to find ways of bringing those ones in. Yeah. I'm
Renee.
here, but there are many others that would love to be here. Yeah.
Renee, and then Bernadette, I see you wanting to come in as well.
Well, very briefly, I think it's about capacity, yes, but definitely about the channels of priority setting and engaging with all the people who should be involved in that priority setting. I think we all too often chase the money, and the money then decides where we should do our research instead of figuring out what kind of research we should do and for whom, and involving the people we're targeting. And we have the same problem in Antwerp, I think, where we're quite far from realities, and our priority setting processes are not really accounting fully for the social relevant problems of the countries we're supposed to work in.
But we can't do it without money.
Sure.
Renee.
Yeah, I have a problem with sort of segmenting research from the bigger institutional changes that need to take place in our health systems to deal with these issues. So I think, for example, if we want people at the local level to do what Clara is saying, to have more space for strategic planning, more space to engage with local communities, to work with their evidence, we've also got to look at the signals we are sending those people on how they are paid and what performance incentives they are being asked to do. Because if you're asked to tick boxes on the number of cases you saw, you're not going to be encouraged to take the time to do that kind of process-driven stuff. So I do think we need to look at our institutional culture and say, what are we trying to build if we're trying to build a people-centered health system? And then get some consistency on that, and the research can then have more sustainability within the system. So I think it's a much bigger question than just the research.
James, I haven't come to you for a while. Would you like to comment on any of the things that people have been talking about for the last few minutes?
Yes, real quickly. I thought this was a really interesting piece of this as someone who works in a local setting that's not my own setting in Brazil, but then who also responds when there are these commissioned research programs. And certainly there are different ways that people can approach that. It kind of depends in many ways, the relations between the funder and the research team and the local reality. And we've found that there's lots of different ways that building capacity can be part of these kinds of programs, whether it's explicitly funded by the funding organization or not. And I think that we need to find more opportunities to be able to do that. And to some extent, maybe that should be more of our professional ethos as part of the research team, how one really builds some level of capacity when engaging in these projects. I can tell you that what I hear very often from researchers in the United States, for example, is we really wish we could hear Clara's research problems because we want to engage on something real, something meaningful. We're sick of studying the same tailored intervention for smoking cessation that we've been doing for so long. We would love to engage and find a forum to do that. So I think there's also kind of a gap of matching engaging other resources and using them, really other research teams as resources, and help to guide the questions that they ask by having some additional fora to hear from the local level what those priorities are. And I think that is really, I think there's a knowledge gap there, and that might be something that forums like this and some follow-ups could actually try to address in some substantive way.
Okay, I'd like to use the chair's privilege to ask a question of my own, reflecting on what we've all been talking about, which is we've been very positive about locally generated knowledge, participatorily derived knowledge. Do we see any role for the Lancet publications, for the Oxbridges and the Ivy League complex, difficult to understand, data crunching, highly generalized papers, or are they completely irrelevant to the problems in the realities that we're trying to address? Does anybody want to come on, Anne?
Not sure if Richard Horton's here, but I'm sure he'll hear about it on Twitter. Of course, there's a role for that. And I mean, as I said, I think there's two levels. I mean, it's also looking at the world we live in, right? There's a real appetite for those sort of evaluations. It drives resources, but not just at the global level. I mean, in country, those sort of publications do still carry weight, especially at the national level. That's been our experience. Clara may want to comment further. And people read The Lancet, right? I mean, it is one of those, it's an institution.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it's a good thing to have a sort of space which brings people together and shares ideas. And as I said, when you have the sort of work that James has done, when you show what can be achieved through primary care reform, that is very useful in driving change elsewhere. It's just that it's not the whole story. I think that's what we're saying. I think none of us are saying it's either or. We're saying we need the quantitative evaluations that I've seen as robust, that a certain audience particularly prioritizes, but it's just part of the picture, and that perhaps we do pay too much attention to that part of the equation than to the realities and the value of both local use of knowledge, local production, and participation in knowledge.
Anybody else? Renee?
Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned, for example, that communities themselves have used work to trigger larger scale surveys to generate the change, to help them generate the change. So there are times when that kind of evidence is very important to continue the process of change that is being built from below as well. So, but the problem I would have is who made the decision about what knowledge was important to put into the Lancet? Or for that matter, how is the knowledge in the Lancet being used strategically to change the role of actors within countries or within local settings to do what they know is important in their own health systems? Or even more importantly, whether the Lancet is so unilinear in what it produces as knowledge that it doesn't acknowledge other forms of knowledge. So I think it is a question of what that particular form of knowledge, whose power, whose control is it reflecting, much more than the specific methodology only that we're talking about.
Thank you. Is anybody else? James, do you want to come in on this? Or?
No, I mean, I think this is, again, this is part of part of a discussion where we have to broaden the parameters. I think all of us would agree that reading some, and I've actually worked with Renee on reviewing some of the work that she's done on primary healthcare. That very thick, detailed description provides much more information than any 2x2 table you can possibly generate. And I also agree we need to find the space to do that. And in fact, we went back and forth a little bit where I think that having a long narrative, which is almost a book in length, might also deter in order to capture that richness, right? There's a certain heft to the vehicle for that knowledge. And that might turn off some audiences. So then how do you also condense without losing the richness? And I think that's really, at least for me, a challenge to understand how that happens. I'm sure experts in this, like Renee and others, have successfully done this. But I think trying to channel and take those rich lessons, I think those are things that people would like to read in The Lancet and other kinds of places. I think sometimes the question is convincing those journals that this really is worthwhile knowledge, it's unique, and then trying to provide the context in which the users of The Lancet, I mean, that might not necessarily be the right audience for a very long description that really goes into the heart of the matter.
All right, thank you. We're reaching the conclusion of the session. Unfortunately, I can feel that we could debate these issues for an awful lot longer, and unfortunately there are still a large number of questions that have come to me at the front that we haven't had time to address. I'm just going to try and pull a few key things out of what we've been talking about for further reflection. I liked the way James started when he said we've learned a lot, or we believe we've learned a lot. That seems to me to really go to the essence of this debate. How do we know what we know, and what do we believe? And a lot of it, as Renee was saying, maybe when we take it down to the nth degree, it becomes a religion rather than a science, and maybe there isn't so very much difference between the two things. One of the questions that we didn't get to, that I think we'll allow to be rhetorical for now, is how do we get people in power, whether they're researchers, policymakers, providers, or other knowledge producers and users, to question their own assumptions and ontological positions and be prepared to remove their blinders? Well, that's the critical question in life, really, isn't it? How do we get people to think a bit harder about the things they think they know and the things they believe? I mean, among the issues that I think have come up across that is questions about, the role of generalization. So one of the questioners was saying, well, how can you generalize from this very specific stuff that you do at the community level? And on the other hand, can we generalize at all? Is there anything that just works? Is that a sensible question? What works? What we need to know is what works where. We've been in our research program talking about the difference between architect sketches and builder's plans. We can know in principle what it is we're trying to get to, a beautiful endpoint. But the builder's plan is the one that engages with the realities on the ground and thinks about how is that beautiful future actually going to be constructed here on this messy, rocky setting. And I think a lot of what we're hearing is about the need to try and reconcile, the big picture stuff with the detailed understandings of what it is we're trying to put that big picture into. I think there's some big questions well about what the questions are that we're trying to ask, and as Clara was raising, who are we trying to give information to? Who's to use the information? So in the questions about what we're trying to ask, sometimes these different paradigms seem to be asking really rather different questions. So we've got questions like what kinds of treatments or what kinds of interventions work, and then there are much broader questions about how social determinants of health outcomes arise, where they come from, and where the points of intervention might be that are likely to be much more context-specific and require the kind of engagement with local communities that we've largely focused the discussion on. So I'm going to end with just some questions, really, that would have been, if we'd had all day to debate these things, we might have been able to get to, but just to further prompt some thinking and can I emphasize that there's still opportunity to input via the marketplace section of the website for this conference, and I think it would be great to see a lively conversation pulling some of these themes out and debating them further in that marketplace. But I think one of the questions that's come up implicitly is by what criteria can we judge different research methodologies and different ways of finding answers? Are there common criteria, or are we actually applying completely different criteria and coming up with different research strategies based on different ideas? I raised the question of what does science mean, and what does the idea, well, you know, both this kind of research is science. Why is science such a good thing that we're appealing to, and do we really have a strong sense of what it means? Why do we want different definitions of construct validity, and are they equally valid, or does it depend on what criteria you're applying? And fundamentally, the questions of ethics in the whole process and the questions of the political economy of the research process have been raised but not answered. So I hope all these themes and questions will actively guide your contributions to the marketplace section of the website. We got one other contribution from the floor with which I'll end, which is also for your reflection, and again, perhaps can be reflected in people's contributions to the marketplace. And that last question is how much has most of the research being presented in this meeting been shared in the societies they were collected from? I hope the answer is to a considerable extent, but let's see what people have to think about that as we get there. So I'd like to thank all the panelists, James as well, who we can see again, good. And I think we've just had a really stimulating discussion. I've very much enjoyed it. I hope you have too.